back to the Messy Reformation. My name's Jason Rice. I'm the lead pastor at Faith Community CRC in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. My co-host is Willie Cronky. He's a member at Pease CRC in Pease, Minnesota. We're just a couple of guys who love the Christian Reformed Church and want to see Reformation happen in our denomination. But whenever Reformation has happened in the history of the church, things get messy. And we're starting to see things get messy in the Christian Reformed Church. So we're taking the opportunity to have conversations with pastors throughout the CRC to find out what's happening in our denomination, but also to talk about what Reformation might look like. If you haven't already, take a moment, click subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming content. We are dropping episodes every single Monday. Also, head on over to our website at themessyreformation.com. You'll find our podcast there and also a blog post each week. With all that said, we're going to get to this week's episode, which is part 1 of our conversation with Jeffery Scripps. So, Jeff, why don't you just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your family, and the church that you're at?
Okay. Well, I grew up as a pastor's kid, and that meant moving from parsonage to parsonage for a while, for a long while. I remember when Dad got the call to pastoral ministry, wondered what that was like. Did God call him on the telephone or something like that? I was about 5 years old when he said that he sensed a call into ministry. And so I figured, okay, God called on the phone. Everybody else does. And no, it wasn't quite that. And we went to East Palmyra, New York. And that was a wonderful place. Sioux Falls, South Dakota became my adopted hometown. And thereafter, I went off to Calvin College, met my wife, who's now we've celebrated 20 years plus together. In June, it'll be 21. So that's, the Lord has worked through that. It's amazing how you can grow in love for each other. And, you think on your wedding day, like, oh, you'll never be as in love. No, actually you get more in love. And how does that work? It's, Christ in the church, you get to appreciate those passages a lot more. Along the way, God blessed us with 2 children, got a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old. And, it's been a lot of fun. They're precious. They have very different personalities, and that's that's the family side. We're all pet people. So just to, while we're in the process of warning each other, we have a very large ginger tabby who may hop up at some point and demand my attention since I am her servant. She's she's my queen. And she's a beloved of the whole family. And we also have a Chihuahua too, which you might hear in the background, but he stays upstairs because we have a division in the house. The cat has the downstairs and the dog has the upstairs. And we have 2 rabbits. Okay.
And so, and then what church are you at currently serving?
Yeah, I'm at the Forest Grove Christian Reformed Church. I sensed the call into pastoral ministry about high schoolish, and again, it wasn't any kind of dramatic event. God didn't call on the phone there either. But he worked through conversations, through my own heart, through the need of the church at the time, which in the 90s, if you can believe it, I think you guys are a little too young for this, maybe not. But in the 90s, churches were desperate for pastors. Guys would graduate out of seminary and they'd get like 3, 4, sometimes one guy I knew had 5 calls right away, graduated in 94, 95. And I graduated high school in 97. So it was still kind of a hot market, so to speak. My dad had a number of calls that he had to turn down, really wrestled with it, felt bad about it. And, in that context, that's where I thought, here I have these interests and these gifts and a heart for the church. Kind of like in Isaiah, here I am, send me. And so I just plowed right ahead, was a theology major in college, and then right on to Calvin Seminary. And when I graduated, I did get a couple of calls, but it was already starting to slow down a little bit. And we can talk about that later, at the kind of the decline of the church and kind of the anxiety therein. But, I got a couple. Most of my classmates would get 1, 2, maybe 3 calls. But it's slowing down from the 90s. 2005, I went to Lebanon in Sioux Center, Iowa for the first charge. 5.5 years, and love the people, love the ministry. Then God called us to Forest Grove Christian Reformed Church in rural Hudsonville, just south of Hudsonville, really, in Michigan. And I've been there since 2011. I didn't think I'd stay in my second charge this long. And right now it seems like I don't know that God's going to move me anywhere anytime soon. It's a small church. Mm-hmm. So, after COVID hit, we were one of those that lost a few, not many, but we did lose some. And when you're a tiny church, even a little is a lot.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we'll see. It's in the Lord's hands. I've learned to, again, just trust in the Lord and be faithful. You guys say it many times on the podcast here. We're not called to be, I'm paraphrasing here, not called to be successful or then don't get bent out of shape if suddenly, your church isn't filled with people and professions of faith and baptisms left and right and everything. Of course, we want to see that, but you know what, maybe sometimes you're like Jeremiah and you're preaching and nobody's listening. And maybe even worse, Jeremiah actually got lowered into the cistern and everything. I've got a wonderful little group, and we've had some trials. You get to the 7-8 year mark in a pastoral tenure, and there was a kerfuffle, but the Lord brought us all through. So,
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
So that's
one of the things. Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking of as you were talking about growing up as a pastor's kid and all of the moves that you made. And now you're talking, you've been at your current charge for 10 years now. And I've been talking with people that there's kind of been this change back in the day. I don't have a year range, but the average pastor stayed at a church like 5 to 7 years. Right. And then they would kind of rotate every 5 to 7 years. But now that seems like there's been more of a move toward longer pastorates, 10, 15 years in a charge. And one of my friends locally here he just moved, but he had been at his charge for over 20 years. And so I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts on what's going on there?
Actually, if you go back further, it gets to 3-4 years. They even had to put something in church order, maybe, that said, you mayn't call a minister after less than something like 18 months or 2 years.
Yeah, I think
you have to pay for the moving expenses. There used to be quite a bit of churning. And I do have a few thoughts on that. I think, my grandpa was a minister too in the Christian Reformed Church. And, that had some positive effects and some negative effects. It really depends on the personality of the pastor and the family. I had some uncles who thrived on it, and I see that in my younger brother. He's just always moving, every 3 or 4 years, even though he just likes to move. And then other family members, other uncles and aunts, you could tell that leaving one really healthy place for a more contentious place would really kind of hurt them, especially in junior high or high school. Some thoughts on it. One of them is that I think back in the day, and I'm talking like the 1950s or 60s or even earlier, you had a lot more of a sameness in the Christian Reformed Church. You had pretty much the same architecture. You certainly were singing out of the old blue hymn book here. And this whole thing, 1959 or then 71, 72 reprint, but it was essentially the same. Order of worship, theology. It wouldn't surprise me if you followed some pastors around from yesteryear, and you could have them serving in classes Grand Rapids East and then in Minn Kota and back again without a whole lot of difficulty. That's changed.
Yeah, big time.
That's changed just a little bit. So I think there's some of what slowed everything down is theological, some theological, you could call it drifting movement that pastors do, congregations do. I think in light of the church decline too, which has been going on since, the 90s, if not earlier, churches have gotten nervous. They started getting nervous probably around 2000, early 2000s, and it's just gotten worse. There's some dysfunction too that has happened. We all have stories of what we call Article 17s, right? Where the pastor and the church aren't getting along and they got to part ways. And that's usually pretty ugly, and congregations typically don't thrive right after that or during that process. And I think search committees are really scared of getting the wrong pastor. So that's another piece of it too.
Yeah.
And so that slows things down from the pull end, you might say. So pastors aren't getting just as many calls. And then you have the personalities of the children, pastor's children, spouse is working a whole lot more. A lot of, I mean, you said, Jason, your wife is a nurse, right?
Yep.
And then I don't know, Willie, you just got married, right?
Yes, sir. That's right.
Yeah. Now, does your wife have a job, or is she homemaker?
Yep. She is a ballet teacher. She's ran a ballet studio for, oh my goodness, probably 11 years now, 11, 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So she runs a Christian ballet academy.
Okay. And she's likely to keep going with that too for the foreseeable future, right?
Yeah. She's training up people right now to kind of assume her roles and responsibilities that she's had over the years. But for the foreseeable future, that's probably where she'll be for a while yet. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and I'm just going through immediately in the list of all our colleagues, I'm having a hard time finding one. I think there's maybe one in my area whose wife is a stay-at-home mom. I think that with the rest of them, so that's a factor too, right?
Yeah.
So if your spouse gets a job, could say that maybe high school has gotten a little harder socially too for children. That's a part of my calculation. So I think you throw all these things in, and it's a lot harder for pastors to do that 3-5 year, and then you could see it if you really had a lot of time on your hands. You could probably chart this out, and you could have it used to be 3 to 5 years, and it was 5 to 8 years, and now it's getting on a decade or so for an average tenure, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's pretty standard. Well, not standard, but a lot of people I've talked to, are hanging in at least till the 10-year mark. And and for me, I see. I mean, I totally agree with you. A lot of those things that you've talked about factor into why it's taking longer. I have the opinion too that good lasting change takes a long time too, and so I've seen benefit in having and staying in one place for a while. I mean, now I've only been at my current church for 3 years, but I was youth pastor at my previous church for 11 years. And so I kind of hit that decade mark there. And I didn't feel like we really started rolling as a ministry until about the 7 or 8 year mark. The last 3 or 4 years, we were really clicking along. We were really seeing the fruit of our labors. The discipleship we had been doing was kind of returning and bearing fruit. We were having kids coming back and now, being leaders in the ministry and leaders in the church. We were seeing all of that happening, but it didn't start happening till about year 7 or 8. And I think Alistair Begg too. He's got a really good talk. I forget. I think it's called "The Dangers and Delights of Pastoral Ministry" or long-term.
Yeah, he gave that at
ministry.
one of the basics conferences I went to.
Oh yeah, were you there?
Yeah, I've been to basics since 2012. Every year that we've had it.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's cool.
I've never been, but I've never been to it, but I always download the talks and listen to them. And that one, for some reason, there's things that he says in there and the way he does it. I have to listen to it like once a year, especially when I'm getting really frustrated in ministry. There's something about that talk that just calms me down and says, you're going to be fine. But in that talk, he says that, and I don't remember how long ago it was, but he said that most pastors usually get in their groove and start, getting on a roll around year 7 or 8, but most pastors leave their church after 6 or 7 years. And he's like, they're leaving just about the time they're just going to start rolling with things. And so, but he also mentions that the danger of being in a church for a long time is you just get comfortable and you just kind of sit and don't try anything new. And you're like, we're good. Everybody's good. We're just good. And
we love our comfort.
Yeah, he says they don't end up burning out; they just rust out. It was his analogy, which I thought was really, really good. They just sit there and rust out. So
Yeah.
you've grown up in the CRC your whole life.
Yep.
And so I'd love to hear what you've seen kind of throughout the years as being some of the strengths of the Christian Reformed Church.
Yeah, I've been a member of the CRC. If I could quote Gimli the dwarf, I'm sitting pretty on number 43. So 43 years I've been into this. I don't have an axe in some work's head, though. I don't. That'd make for problems. Yeah, one of the strengths right away of the CRC, and it's also, we can get in. Well, you've got into some of the other conversations. Is we have such a strong family emphasis, and it's a strength and a weakness. The strong part of it is there's a loyalty that people had and still have, especially the older generation, still have to their congregation. It's just kind of like, hey, we are all, one immigrant group. Well, when did you come here? 1880 something? Like, yeah, we're still an immigrant group, even though it's been over 100 years. We're still here. And but aren't there other people here who aren't Dutch? Yeah, so we are changing, but there's a lot of that, a lot of that mentality. The good side of it is, you in a family will put up with a lot of nonsense from each other. You can have grace and patience. You can encourage one another. You can kind of be the little, small, safe environment like home where you can practice your theology and your preaching and your writing. And we've produced a few, as I understand, a few good philosophers and a couple of, Bible scholars and so on. We've done that. That's and we can get into the weaknesses later, why that long term is not good for a church. Mm-hmm. But a certain sense of, hey, we are Christian Reformed and we are in this together. And that institutional loyalty. I mean, the fact that you could have, for as long as we did, ministry shares work as spectacularly as they did, and we're told maybe even today that it's the envy of the church world, although that's fading too. But the fact that everyone just has a sense of, hey, we're all on board together. I think some other strengths include for a long time conviction that the Word of God reigns supreme, and that's still embedded in the worship service. The church people still put it at the top of their list, even if in reality maybe there's some other things they desire out of their pastor a bit more. They still have that sense that, no, you really ought to put the preaching of the word as the main thing. You really have to have scripture rule. And some well thought out doctrine. I think those things have served the CRC well. Practices like having our classes, our gems and cadets, and people might have criticized the cadet program, for example, a while back, saying, well, why couldn't you be in the Boy Scouts? Because that's where people are. And he had a point. But now we see what happened with the Boy Scouts.
Exactly.
The church has a little bit more control over these kinds of programs. It's that can really be a great help in preserving the integrity of the gospel and what it is to grow into a young man, a young woman, that kind of thing. So we've got a lot of strengths. Stewardship, I think, usually as a group, and I think this is a Calvinist international thing. Wherever you find Calvinists, they're usually pretty good with money, and they're good with investing, and they can put together some pretty good programs and some buildings and things. Now we've got a downside here too. And I remember that coming out one of your shows where it said, but we're also quite a bit introverted, and if you mix that Kuyperian theology with introversion and you don't have the gospel, that's where you get all of this social justice stuff and the political involvement and these things that really are going astray from the mission of the church. But in and of itself, hey, those are just a few of the strengths right there.
Yeah. And I'll just have to say, just from my own personal testimony of the last few months of my battle with COVID and all of that, the family aspect of the CRC was almost overwhelming to me. The number of people I had messaging me and praying for me, throughout all of North America and even the world. I mean, I had people in Liberia, people in the Dominican Republic praying for me. And it was powerful just because of the Yeah, the familyness, right? That we joke about Dutch
Mhm.
bingo in the CRC, where everybody's connected to everybody, and it's kind of a joke. But when things get tough and you need support and prayer, that's huge, and that carries you through, and it helped carry my family through, and so that is a massive strength that I don't think we should overlook too much. I had a couple friends who grew up in the CRC, and it just drove them nuts. They hated Dutch bingo. Like, oh, we're just a bunch of inbreds, and and I always said I didn't grow up with that, even though my Dutch roots go deep and my CRC roots go deep. I didn't grow up in all of that, and so coming back to it has been amazing. And I said, yeah, it can get kind of weird and inbred. I agree, but there's a powerful support system there for congregations, and then being a pastor as well, knowing that you've got all these other pastors around you supporting you, walking with you, that you can go to. That's really huge. I mean, I'm one of those guys. I love classis meetings, and so I was really bummed I had to miss my last classis meeting because I was in the hospital. But so I missed some of that networking with other pastors. So what are some of the things that you're seeing now in the CRC that are causing you some concern?
Well, yeah, only too mindful of Philippians 4 and being mindful of what is good and excellent and praiseworthy and so on. You don't want to too quickly go into that, but at the same time, you can't ignore it when as Jude says, you get people who exchange change the license, the grace of our God into a license for morality. And that's what I see going on with the all one body group and sympathetic figures. I think that's the biggest, probably the most external, obvious to see kind of concern. But that is really connected with a number of other things that I found concerning for some time. The women in office decision back in the mid 90s was, I think, something of a almost, I don't want to say quite a canary in the coal mine, but kind of like that really bothered me. And I've gone back and forth on the issue, but I remember at the time, boy, did that really bother me. And since then I've come down really strongly on the traditional side. And I think that, I understand that there are a couple of different ways you can arrive at the egalitarian position. But what I got a sense of going through seminary and being with colleagues is that, there are some who take a more, well, you could say, conservative path towards allowing for women's ordination, but a great many would not. They just take the very quick route of, hey, it's it was a message for a church of another time. You had the Temple of Artemis and you had all these other things going on here. And so Paul really doesn't mean to say what he says. And that just never sat well with me to say, I do not permit a woman to teach, have authority. Oh, that really means that you may. Oh,
yeah.
And it's like, no, that, so that kind of thing. But, in the late 90s, early 2000s, I thought, well, not a salvation issue. You're always going to have disagreements. This is Protestantism. It's very hard to keep a church together. And thought we could go along with that. But, just sensing some of the convictions, that isn't quite the right word, impulses, instincts that seem to come along with the pro women in office movement, that kind of concerned me. And then along with that, changes at, one thing I've noticed that at Calvin Seminary, when I went through, a lot of the professors were former pastors. And now that is really changed, unless I'm just completely unaware of some of these, but it looks like, and I don't mean that as a slam against any particular professor or anything like that, but just to note the overall trend away from having pastors equip pastors. And they're professors and they have doctorates and so on, but just to get people who their whole experience, it seems like, has been in the academy, and they've been in the church, but not as a pastor out there, with the maybe 100 members or 200 members, and all kinds of things, dropped onto them because they're pastor and those expectations. And I think that's, that's a bit of a concern too. And I think the political involvement, I think when you just get a lot more of that separation between I guess you could say hate using the word elite, that's not right. But folks who get to work at denomination headquarters and so on, they just seem to be running in different circles, going to different conferences, and just having different priorities than what I have and the churches I know. And I know there's some churches that are sympathetic to what 28th Street likes to do, but a lot are not. So I do see a division, and we've put it off, I think, for a long time. We've known that these fault lines, to use Voda Balcom's language, these fault lines have been there, and we've known that. But yeah, we have put off the decision, I think, and it looks like it is going to be some kind of a realignment, and I don't know how that will play out, but those are some concerns.
Yeah, so I've got a number of things I want to jump on off of there, but one of the things that just popped into my mind as you were talking was, so I'm one of those guys, I really like to read CRC history as well. And so this last summer, I was rereading James Bratt's book, Dutch Calvinism in Modern America. And I remember him talking in that book about the massive controversy going on in the CRC back in the 20s. And so it was just a big fight. Everybody, they kicked Gerhardus Voss out. He got removed from the seminary. We lost a bunch of good people in that fight. And then he said, after that fight kind of ended, the 30s were like an era of peace. Just nobody wanted to fight anymore. That was like, we're done fighting. We're just going to be nice. We're going to ignore things. But then all of a sudden things blew up again because they refused to have some of that conflict. And I've been wondering if that's kind of been the case for us, that, like you mentioned, the women in office thing was really tense for about 20 years. Kind of going back and forth and back and forth. And then finally, it, went through in the late 90s and got pushed out to the different classes. And then it seems like as a denomination, we've just refused to fight about things. Anytime somebody tries to bring something up, until recently, now I think we're getting into a place where we all realize we have to take a stand. But for the last 15 years, last almost 20 years, we've been a denomination that's refused to enter into any form of discipline or even fight. And I've seen that. You mentioned All One Body. And All One Body's been active for quite a while. I guess I don't know when they were founded, but I've been watching synods and reading overtures coming through about All One Body. It seems like quite some time, where people have been sending in overtures saying we need to do some discipline on this group. They're teaching things contrary to what our denomination holds. They're not. This is not helpful. And it seems like every time that comes up, synod says, well, for me, it feels like just a political dodge. Like, we don't really want to touch it. And so here's some church order ninja moving that says we can't deal with it now. You have to do these things. You have to do these things first, and then we'll maybe deal with it. And then they do those things, and they bring it back to synod, and they're like, oh, wait,
we didn't want you to do that.
Yeah, shoot, you did it. So no, we can't. So what do you think that's part of what's going on, or is there something else going on why we're so hesitant to enter into some of these conflicts or even some of these disciplinary actions?
Well, I think that's a big part of it. I think another part, and this would be, I think, to look at it with in a charitable light. I think all of us probably as Christians, because I think the All One Body group would claim to be Christian. I'd have some questions about that, but we all, at least, we seek to follow Jesus and be like him. And we've all read our Bibles, and we know that, Paul writes in the pastoral letters, don't be quarrelsome. And, if at possible, live at peace with everyone. Romans 14, just, take put the mask on, or don't worry about the mask if it, offends your brother, and that kind of thing. So I think we have a strong urge within us, and probably rightly so, to not jump right into a fight, and also maybe to assume the best of each other. I think, to use a Harry Potter thing, Snape will say to Draco's mom, that is Dumbledore's weakness, that he sees the best in everybody. And of course, that actually ends up not being a weakness, but and to be fair, folks on the other side, so to speak, they can come up with some pretty convincing sounding, presentations. I think on further inspection, they do fall apart. That reminds me a lot of the women in office thing. It appeals to some good basic instincts, right? Let's make sure people are included. Let's make sure that we're treating people fairly. Hey, somebody's got gifts. Why shouldn't they be pastors? All that sort of thing. We shouldn't be, mean, and we shouldn't be harsh with one another. But there does come a time where you have to call out the false teachers and the false teaching, and recognize when something is just moved beyond the category of agree to disagree. So I think but we're slow to do that. And there's a good side of it. And then of course there's a not so good side of it too. Because, if you refuse to take stands, then, you actually make the fight worse, I think.
That's all we have for this week. Stay tuned next week for part 2 of our conversation with Jeffery Scripps. Until then, don't forget this is Christ's church, and he bought it with his blood. And we've been warned that wolves will come in trying to destroy the flock. So keep a close watch on your life and on your doctrine. Preach the word in season and out of season, and keep fighting the good fight in this messy Reformation.